Hello and welcome to another episode of Transforming Business with me, Marvin Schneider, where I talk about all things business transformation, oddly enough, but not any generic kind of business transformation. The kind of transformation I'm talking about is very special. It is about transitioning companies and the investment communities to create wealth. That's important, but doing it in a way that enhances the well-being of all stakeholders, including the individual, the wider community, and the environment. And so this is quite a broad-based transformation agenda. It's way more extensive than just another ESG initiative. So that's just a little bit about the transformation. But basically, this whole podcast series is about talking about what all of that means and how important it is and what needs to happen to make this a reality. And so over the next many episodes, I'll be talking about those kinds of things. But here's the thing. I'm looking for a co-host to help host this podcast series because here's the deal. It's quite painful to sit in front of a camera on your own talking about these things without some kind of an interaction. And I know a lot of people are very good at, on camera, in front of the camera on their own. There's a lot of YouTubers who do it very successfully. I'm not one of those, so I'd much prefer to have a dialogue and a conversation. So if you are passionate about business as a force for good for all of humanity, and you have a deep background in corporate life and the investment community, I'd love for you to get in contact with me and see if you're interested in co-hosting this series with me. And generally, the idea is that we'd run a podcast once a week, maybe twice a week, kind of depending on what topics come up, and we'll interview prominent people and use that as a platform to get the message out there, get momentum towards this transformation agenda, because God knows humanity needs it. All right, so that's that. And then basically in this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about myself and just lay out a little bit about the transformation agenda that I have in mind. So I live in Australia, and I've been a long-term resident in Melbourne, but I've recently moved to a regional community called Wodonga, and it's a great tree change opportunity. And that has really been made possible because of COVID and because of the new normal of working from home, video conferencing based interactions. So it allows me to have my audience and my constituents all over the world without having to fly everywhere and be in-person meetings. And that's just a great opportunity. And I suspect a lot of people have made that shift as well. And I've done a lot of very creative, very intensive workshop-based work where in the past, the dominant mindset was that you had to be in person in these big conference rooms. And I've just found that not to be true. And so I've got a team of people working creatively on various issues, and they work independently, come together in real time with all of, the cloud-based, document sharing, video conferencing, share screens, whiteboarding, the whole thing. It is eminently possible to do this. And I suspect a lot of people have already worked that out. So that's where I live and that's where I operate from, but I've got a global audience and a global constituent, and I'm working with organizations from all over the world. So a little bit about myself. My background, my undergraduate degree was in electrical engineering, but the interesting thing is that I never actually practiced as an electrical engineer or as an engineer. And there's one or two reasons for that, but one of them was that the year that I graduated, I think it was in 1987, was the first year that Australia's largest company, which was BHP back in the day, did not hire engineers. And so, there just weren't the opportunities for a new graduate engineer. But then the other reason is I had a long-term desire to be a consultant and to advise on significant issues rather than, being part of the engine, the machinery within a specific corporate environment. So I did straight after my engineering degree, I did an MBA at the Australian Graduate School of Management, which was arguably back in those days the preeminent business school in Australia, at least. That's always debatable. And so through that MBA experience, I got the foundations in corporate finance, in strategy, in operations, human resources, in business law. You get the idea. It's the whole sort of experience. And at least back in those days, the MBA program kind of led you into one of two predominant, maybe three predominant career paths. One is straight in a corporate career path, which I wasn't particularly interested in at that point. But the other two main career paths were in strategy consulting or management consulting, and then investment banking. And as much as I really got into corporate finance, just the whole investment banking thing just didn't resonate with me at all. So I had the opportunity to interview with a number of the big global consulting firms who were taking MBA graduates. And I was very fortunate to be made an offer from a US-based top-tier consulting firm called Maricon Associates. And I think it's called Maricon these days, rebranded a little bit. And that was just an outstanding career starter, because Maricon's whole thing back in the day, and I suspect still is, was marrying corporate finance with strategy and business operations. And the predominant theory, which they then put into practice as an entire consulting practice, was that the value of the firm is a function of its strategy. And so if you want to increase the value of a firm, you need to conceive of and then implement a strategy which gives a higher value than what you're currently doing. And that's a fairly simple idea, but it's a very potent idea. And in my years at Maricon, I effectively honed my skills in corporate finance and in strategy, and using those skills and operations, and using those skills in advising large corporates effectively how to enhance the value of what it is that they were doing, which was fantastic. And in doing that, I had an opportunity to spend about 2.5, 3 years in London. And I was given an opportunity to migrate to the US. But at that stage, my then wife we were thinking about starting a family. And we really had the sense that we wanted to come back to Australia. And at that point, Maricon had closed its Australian offices. So I left Maricon and joined another consulting firm called A.T. Kearney back in the day. And they're currently called Kearney. And they're still an excellent firm. So I spent about 2 years at Kearney. And then after that, I kind of had a calling that I really needed to have a corporate career experience. So for my sins, I joined one of the largest banking organizations in Australia, and in the corporate finance team. And then within about a year or so, I was made the head of value management. And I was basically sort of sitting between the CFO, the CEO, and then all of the business units to help them in their strategic planning and implementation, with a focus on enhancing the value of the firm. And that was a great experience. And then after that, I was working so hard, to be honest, that I kind of burnt out of that a little bit. And I stepped out on my own. And then at least for the last 15 to 20 years, I've been operating solo under my own brand called Valuation Insights, and been consulting and collaborating with various other consulting organizations. And I had a stint for about 8 years as an independent valuation expert, which was another great experience, advising in sort of court cases and big transactions and disputes around valuation. And so that kind of really sort of honed the corporate finance and valuation side of my skill set. So more recently, I've transitioned into what I've kind of discovered these days is to be my life's purpose. And that is to help organizations around the world, so large corporates and the investment community, to transform the way that they do things, their mindset, their consciousness as well, by the way, to, yes, create wealth. That's important. But the recognition these days is that the only way you can really do that in any sustainable and ongoing basis is if you're enhancing the well-being of the individual, the wider community, and the environment. Now, a lot of people are sort of getting onto the ESG bandwagon, and that's great, but it's a little bit limited. And so the bigger picture side of things is really what we're going to be talking about in this podcast series. So I hope you can join with me regularly, and as this story, the messaging is unfolding, I'd love to have a co-host. So if you're inclined in any way to do that with me, please get in contact with me on either LinkedIn, or I put my email address on the YouTube clip, the description, so it's easy to get in contact with me. And here's another call to action for now, and we're going to have many calls to action as this podcast series unfolds. If you are a board chair or a CEO of a organization, listed is fine, private is great as well, that has an inclination that there is a better way of doing business, that the primary purpose of business is to serve humanity. If you have that as an inclination in any way whatsoever, please get in contact with me, because I can absolutely help in transitioning, transforming, and embedding that whole service to humanity while creating wealth agenda into the organization. Over the last decade or so, I've built all of the understanding, a whole range of transformation processes, toolkits, digital assets. We're all shovel ready to go in this transformation agenda. And so we really do need to build an ecosystem of influential people that are dedicated to the idea that business and the investment community has a dominant purpose to serve humanity. And yes, do that in a way that creates wealth. But there's a lot to be understood about this, and that's what this podcast series is going to be all about. So thanks for joining in. Hope that you can join me regularly in these podcast series, and please like, share, subscribe on YouTube, share it on LinkedIn. The more that this messaging gets out, and it balances out the other messaging, which is very unhelpful, I should say, and it's what's holding business back from doing the right thing. The more that this messaging gets out, the easier it's going to be to do the things that business needs to do and the investment needs to do for the benefit of all of humanity. So thanks for listening in. Bye for now, and see you next time.